Yet Gislin's sudden demand to take Vanessa caught everyone off guard. The silence that followed hung heavily in the room. Breaking the tension, Hubert questioned whether Gislin truly intended to take Vanessa. Gislin confirmed this to the Tower Master, asserting that he would make Vanessa his personal mage. Fragments of a previous life flickered through Gislin's mind. One where a sword used as a pan to grill meat for dinner. It had been during his time as the head of a mercenary group, taking a rare moment of rest between campaigns. By his side sat a subordinate, a sword brother, and to be precise was Gislin's favorite slave named Claude, whose right hand had been replaced with a hook. As the meat sizzled, Gislin noticed it was beginning to burn and made a sharp remark about it. In a tone laced with frustration, Claude challenged the complaint, pointing out the absurdity of making a one-armed man cook. Gislin silently raised a clenched fist in response, prompting Claude to withdraw his words, pretending it had been a joke all along. Shifting the conversation, Claude brought up something that might interest his leader, a name spoken with intrigue, the Red Nightmare, Vanessa. Gislin admitted ignorance, prompting Claude to elaborate. According to intel he recently gathered, the rumors spoke of a mage who had incinerated the northern region of Lithuania. She had reached the Seventh Circle, a woman known as Vanessa, feared and infamous as the Red Nightmare. Gislin responded with mild curiosity, noting the title sounded extravagant, and asked for more details. Claude explained further. Allegedly, this mage had gone completely mad. Despite being a mage, she had taken the unusual route of learning mana cultivation. That oddity captured Gislin's attention. He inquired why a mage would skip the mana circle method to pursue such a path. Claude offered a simple explanation: madness. He went on to describe Vanessa's rampage. Fires, deaths, and economic ruin followed wherever she went. The nobility had been driven to desperation. In fact, the most recent extermination request had her as the target. Gislin paused to consider. A mage who had reached the Seventh Circle through mana cultivation, rather than traditional methods, intrigued him. As firelight danced in the camp and the crackle of burning would fill the silence, Gislin smiled in amusement, evidently fascinated by the chaotic figure. It was then that he made a decision. Turning to Claude, he suggested they bring her in. Claude's reaction was one of pure disbelief. Reflecting on that moment, Gislin knew that the plan had never come to fruition. Vanessa had already lost control of her magic, and by the time he found her, she was on the brink of death. Yet even then, her potential had not been extinguished. She still possessed the aptitude of a Seventh Circle mage. With guidance now, she could thrive under Perdium. Fueled by knowledge from a previous life, Gislin had resolved to take her under his protection. At that moment, the trio began a comment. Gillian asked if he was referring to the girl from earlier. Kaer chimed in, noting she hadn't appeared particularly powerful. Belinda leaned in closer, whispering a soft request to be informed beforehand if he ever intended to bring someone in. Meanwhile, across the room, murmurs spread among the mages. The Red Hat Elder whispered that the situation worked out perfectly. Vanessa had been a burden anyway, and giving her away seemed like an easy solution. The Yellow Hat Elder whispered that caring for her up to this point should be more than enough to honor their past ties with Lonato. With this in mind, Hubert approached and began to speak, formally acknowledging Vanessa as one of Scarlet Flame Tower's prized mages. He implied she would serve the tower well. Before he could finish, Gislin cut him off with additional demands. Combat mages of the Third Circle or higher must also be dispatched to Perdium. Fury surged in Hubert's heart. He wondered whether Gislin was planning some massive construction project on the estate. Gislin clarified that mages were needed for territorial battles. The announcement sparked alarm among the elders. Combat mages typically earned hazard pay, and now the tower was being asked to supply them without compensation. Gislin firmly reiterated his terms. Triple the market price, deployment of Third Circle or higher mages to Perdium for a year, and Vanessa assigned as his personal mage. These three conditions were non-negotiable in exchange for the runestones. The trio tensed visibly. The demand for triple the market price alone was shocking, yet Gislin had added more. On the other side, the elders glared at him with growing hostility. Hubert's mind raced. Purchasing the runestones at a high price might be justified given their urgent situation, but this felt like an overstep. Summoning his mana in a surge of rage, Hubert caused the room to tremble beneath the weight of his power. The elders joined in, unleashing their own magical presence to bear down on the young man. Yet Ghislain remained seated, unfazed, unaffected by the sheer force pressing in from all sides. Hubert locked eyes with him, voice brimming with indignation. The accusation rang clear. Ghislain Perdium must have believed him a fool. He invoked a long-standing law, declaring that mages affiliated with a magic tower were forbidden from participating in territorial warfare. To propose sending core mages of the Third Circle or higher into battle, while displaying ignorance of the kingdom's basic laws, was nothing short of an insult to the Scarlet Flame Tower. In Hubert's eyes, it warranted death, and he threatened to reduce Ghislain to ash. The reasoning, on paper, seemed sound. Ghislain had indeed made the first aggressive suggestion. The air grew tense as Belinda, Gillian, and Kayer prepared for confrontation. Their opponents were 5th and 6th Circle mages, formidable foes. Even united, the odds remained unfavorable for them. Gillian braced himself to leap into action, prepared to shield his lord with his own body should the situation escalate. Yet, Ghislain remained composed. Calmly, he posed a question, one that gave Hubert pause. Was he truly certain he wouldn't regret this? Hubert hesitated, compelled to hear more. Ghislain then revealed a critical piece of information. A massive vein of runestones had been discovered within Perdium's territory, far exceeding the modest supply brought that day. In fact, by several dozen times. The revelation stunned Hubert and the elders. Their mana ebbed away as they listened. Ghislain continued, stating that news of the discovery was already spreading throughout the northern region. He posed a rhetorical question. What might that imply? Hubert understood instantly. Many would soon come seeking the runestone's vein. Ghislain commended the Tower Master's quick thinking. Rising to his feet, he clarified his intentions. Perdium had no desire to wage war. The territory simply needed the tower's support while building strength. If the Scarlet Flame Tower extended its help through this crisis, Ghislain promised an exclusive access to the runestones. Hubert echoed the offer. Exclusive rights? To seal the agreement, Ghislain extended a hand. With such a deal in place, it would only be a matter of time before the Scarlet Flame Tower surpassed the Crimson Magic Tower and reclaimed its position at the pinnacle. The proposal was tempting, enough to make pride take a back seat. Greed began to stir in Hubert's heart, overtaking the anger that had consumed him moments earlier. A reliable runestone supply represented a dream come true. Ghislain had struck a vulnerable nerve which offering both ambition and security. The storm of fury faded. With renewed optimism, Hubert grasped Ghislain's hand firmly, a smile curving his face. The shift in demeanor left Ghislain slightly unsettled. Following the meeting, Hubert pulled aside Alfoy. The decision was made that Alfoy would accompany the young lord to Perdium. Alfoy protested. He questioned the decision, pointing out the many other mages available. Hubert dismissed the objection. The greatest talent in Scarlet Flame Tower's history was being sent not out of obligation, but because the future depended on it. As chief officer, Alfoy would represent the tower's interests. The compliment left Alfoy glowing. Hearing those words from his master stirred pride. As the mercenaries began unloading the runestones, Hubert elaborated further. This mission would serve as preparation for his eventual ascension as Tower Master. He was to monitor the estate closely and prevent any attempts to divert the runestones. If a territorial conflict did erupt, he was to retreat without engaging. All that was required was endurance for 1 year. Within that time, the Scarlet Flame Tower would surpass Crimson and reclaim its place at the top. Alfoy accepted the mission eagerly, responding with unwavering resolve. However, the moment he arrived at Perdium, the excitement faded. His expression soured as he took in the estate's condition. Standing before the new arrivals, Ghislain welcomed the mages alongside his subordinates and mercenary forces. Among the mages, opinions were mixed. One observed that the castle was constructed in a classical style. Another added that while not flamboyant, it was practical. A third noted the use of proportional harmony in the architectural layout. But Alfoy seethed internally. In his eyes, it was nothing more than a wretched backwater. Only his master's command had brought him here. To think, the heir to the tower, reduced to working in such filth. When it came time to announce his position, Alfoy did so with formality. He identified himself as a third circle mage and heir to the Scarlet Flame Tower, assigned to lead the dispatched mages. However, Ghislain interrupted without hesitation. There was work to be done, and Alfoy was instructed not to let down his guard. The comment left Alfoy speechless. Rage churned inside him at being treated like a servant. Resentment brewed. Inwardly, he vowed that once he became Tower Master, he would deal with Ghislain accordingly. Ghislain called him back from his thoughts with a question. He wanted to know where Vanessa was. Alfoy turned casually, replying that she was likely at the back, handling the luggage. Soon after, Vanessa arrived, breath heavy as she carried the baggage in her arms. Gasping for breath, she finally made it to the gathering crowd. Through her fatigue, she opened her eyes and realized that the young lord himself stood there, welcoming them. Immediately, she bowed and offered her greeting. Alfoy muttered beneath his breath, urging her to hurry and remarking that he had doubted her arrival altogether. Ghislain briefly considered how to deal with the fool. Maiming the heir of the magic tower would certainly provoke backlash. It would be too risky. Instead, he approached the girl, raising a hand to beckon her forward. He instructed Vanessa to set everything down and come to him. Surprised, she responded hesitantly, reminding him that she had yet to finish moving everyone's luggage. Before she could continue, Ghislain grabbed one of the bags himself, even as Alfoy interjected dismissively. According to him, she had always done menial tasks at the tower, and, being incapable of using magic, might as well continue with chores. Before Alfoy could utter another word, Ghislain hurled the bag squarely at his face. Injuring the heir would have gone too far, but humiliation was just the right dose of punishment. Alfoy cried out in frustration, shouting in disbelief. Ghislain remained calm, asserting that Vanessa no longer belonged to the tower. From that moment on, she was under his protection, and mistreatment would not be tolerated. He then issued a warning that this incident would be overlooked, but if it ever happened again, the consequences would be severe. Watching the scene unfold, Vanessa slowly regained her breath. A faint blush bloomed across her cheeks as she witnessed someone stand up for her for the first time after a long while. But Alfoy refused to back down. His face twisted in rage as he shouted about the absurdity of being treated in such a way. He was the heir to the Scarlet Flame Tower, a third circle mage, and this backwater noble had dared to demean him. Rallying the others, he barked out a command. Even if their host bore a noble title, the insult had gone too far. The estate could be reduced to flames in an instant if they chose to act. He urged them to rise and defend their pride as mages. With a sigh, Ghislain snapped his fingers. At once, the mercenary army, hardened by the brutal conflict within the Forest of Beasts, moved to surround the mages with mechanical precision, responding immediately to their commander's gesture. Alfoy panicked. He shouted in disbelief, outraged that these savages would dare raise weapons against mages. This wasn't how mages were meant to be treated. Ghislain silenced him with a single command, cutting off the tirade. As the mages turned their attention to the young lord, he laid out the reality. No matter how they were treated, the terms of the contract were clear. He now held the legal right to command the mages for 1 year, granted directly by the master of the tower. In exchange, exclusive access to the runestones had been secured. If any of this fell apart due to their defiance, it would be the tower master, not them, who suffered the loss. Alfoy stood speechless, fully aware that losing access to the runestones would devastate the Scarlet Flame Tower. Ghislain pressed the point. Their only role in Perdium was to serve as backup mana sources. If they wanted better treatment, they should commit to that role without complaint. Alfoy's face burned with anger. The thought of being reduced to little more than a battery for others was beyond humiliating. Still, he could neither argue nor act. Turning away, Ghislain issued a command to Kaer and Gillian that they were to ensure the mages learned their place. Lit up with unsettling glee, Kaer commented that life at the tower must have been comfortable for the scholars. Gillian agreed, promising that the newcomers would adapt quickly to life in Perdium. Alfoy trembled with rage. He could barely contain his fury, but he remained powerless before the two. Meanwhile, Vanessa stood still, slightly flustered as she watched her former peers being disciplined before her eyes. She jumped slightly as Ghislain approached and addressed her. Ghislain asked that from that moment forward, she was to obey only him. He reiterated that she had become his personal mage. Her eyes widened in shock, and a soft blush colored her cheeks. Since the passing of her previous master, no one had ever treated her with such dignity. Yet doubt crept in. She looked away and expressed her concern. As Alfoy had pointed out, she couldn't even use magic. Being entrusted as a personal mage seemed far too much. Ghislain extended his hand in invitation. Being well aware of the potential hidden within her, Ghislain declared that he would make her capable of wielding magic. An offer to help her achieve her potential.